Hello, this is Patrick Collison at qdabra Software, and today I am demonstrating to you how to use InfoPath and Azure to share data between two different Office 365 accounts, two different companies. So the key takeaways for this quick presentation are as follows. We're going to submit InfoPath form data from a SharePoint 365 site, Office 365. We're going to submit the data to a database running in Azure, I don't know how to say it. We're also going to query that data, and we're going to pull it into our form. So InfoPath, I'll talk more about InfoPath in a second. The final takeaway for today is that we're going to share data between these two 365 accounts. Now, to give you a quick overview of what I'm going to show, we have these two accounts that we're going to use for the demonstration. We have the qdabra account, which you see at the top here, and that's the big Q with the asterisk in it. And we have on the right here the Hubru account, and Hubru is one of our trusted partners, and they've done a lot of work in the Office 365 space, and they actually came to us with this scenario several months ago and were instrumental in giving us the incentive and the insights into developing this solution for you today. So the first thing that's going to happen is this qdabra site, I'm going to submit a form from a web page running on this 365 site. That form is going to be submitted to an Azure web service, and that web service is going to map the data into the database. The second thing that you'll see another company logging in. I'll log in to another site in Office 365, and I will pull the data from the web service into my form. It's going to copy the data in, and I'm going to then add data to that form and submit it back to the web service, and that's going to give us V2 of the data. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my qdabra account, log back into that account, and show you that the data can be pulled into the form. Okay, so for the scenario, this is the hub and spoke scenario, and it could be a spoke to spoke or it could be a hub and spoke. In this case, we're sharing data between two different companies, and for the purpose of this demo, let's call one company the hub, Hubru, and let's call another company the spoke, and this is qdabra. And this is a common pattern that we see in industry and in business today. Businesses have outside vendors. Those vendors collect samples. For example, the environmental consultants. Environmental consultants go out to a site, they collect a sample of hazardous materials. Maybe it's a wallboard, maybe it's a lead paint sample, and they ship the sample to the lab for analysis. The lab, in this case the hub, would send a letter back to the consultant with the results, and then the consultant has to actually create some kind of a report. So for the specific scenario, I'm going to use the environmental consulting scenario. Now here's the Joe environmental consultant here. He's drowning in a sea of data, paper forms, and he just can't get a handle on his business process. So his challenge is, business processes today rely on paper. That's his problem. He is using email and faxes to transfer data from the lab, get it into his form, but data reentry is required, and that causes problems because he might type it in wrong, or it takes time, and it's not something that he can run a report on. So here's where we want to be. Here's we'll call him Joe Cool, and he's got his report showing all of the samples that he submitted to the lab in the last month, and how long it took to get those samples, the results back, and how much his customers paid him for those results. Okay, so the solution we're going to use for this scenario is 365. We love Office 365. Why? Because it's inexpensive. The E3 package, which is one of the packages that Microsoft offers, is just $20 a month per person. So a lot of small businesses have these E3 accounts on 365. They can use InfoPath. So InfoPath comes, just like all the other Office products, it comes packaged with Office 365 along with SharePoint and Link and Exchange and of course all the Office products if you want to download them. So you've got a lot of really wonderful value in Office 365, And one of those is InfoPath. InfoPath is what you use to create forms for your business process. And InfoPath came onto the scenes in 2003. I was actually the development manager for that team that created the original version of InfoPath, and we created this rich form technology, so it allows you to create a form, a web page that collects data, and it does so using rules and validation. So you can actually create a nice looking form that is built for your specific process, and that form can have validation. In other words, it can have rules and logic that say that this field must be filled out in this way. For example, Social Security numbers in the U.S., it would have however many digits. I guess it's 9 digits, and they're spaced in a certain format, right? There also might be rules in the form. So it might have a rule so that if this value is less than 18, then it requires a signature by an adult or something like that, right? So you might have rules like that in your form. Now, in addition to the rich form technology, InfoPath provides validation, and that's not just in the type of data that you're entering, but it also validates the structure of the data, and this is very important. XML stands for Extensible Markup Language. It is a standard in the industry today for exchanging data on the web between business processes. So the fact that InfoPath is based on XML means that you can use it to create a form that is essentially it's the input to your business process. So InfoPath really paves that last mile to your data collection doorstep and allowing you to enter the data into the form. And it's going to be valid. If they can submit the form, the data is valid. And what that means is that our back-end logic, the server-side piece, doesn't have to have a lot of extra logic in it. It can basically accept it because it knows it came from InfoPath. InfoPath basically assures the back-end systems that it came in the right XML format. There's a contract there. So that's very important because it means less coding on the server. Finally, InfoPath is great because you can connect to those web services without any code. It connects to SOAP or REST web services without any extra developer needed. You don't need to hire a developer to write code for your form. And these are key differentiators in the electronic forms area. Unlike PDF forms which require code, or Word or Excel documents which require code and don't validate XML, you have a very simple solution here out of the box in Office 365. Now we're pairing that technology, that client technology, with SQL Azure on the server. And SQL Azure is your inexpensive database in the cloud. You can go to Microsoft SQL Azure, you can create an account, and our account is just $90 a month. They're very inexpensive, various plans, but it's basically going to be somewhere between $100 and $500 to have your server, depending on how much data you need, how much data, web service performance, and so forth. You can configure it how you like, but it's very inexpensive on a monthly basis. So once again, we're going to take this data from our qdabra 365 account. We're going to submit it to our web service running in SQL Azure, which is going to map it into the database. And then our hub company is going to pull the data out, add some data to the form, and submit it back. And that's going to become V2. And then our consultant in the field, our spoke company, qdabra, is going to pull that data in and use it to create a report. So a couple extra pieces that we added to this solution were the following two pieces. Now we have an InfoPath plugin for your InfoPath Forms, and it's basically Key Roles. Key Roles it provides all of the features and functions that you don't get out of the box. And specifically, we're using three samples here, sample features. We're using get input parameters. We're using the submit to submit the form data to a list. And we're then copying the data from the web service into the main data source. So those three things cannot be done in an InfoPath form without writing a little bit of code. So we've written all that code for you, and we've put it in Key Roles, and Key Roles is a very popular plugin for InfoPath. If you go to our website, qdabra.com, you can find out more about it. It is an inexpensive tool that you can use in all your forms to enable extra stuff, and there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with Key Roles, and these are three of them right now. We've got about 120 different features there. Now we're also adding our web service on Azure, and this is our web service. It's a generic data-driven web service called DB Excel, and it allows you to map your XML data to your database. And I'll talk more about that when I do the demo. It is very easy to configure. It also provides a web method to allow you to query the database and query it using a field in your form so you can filter it easily. So before I do the demo, I just want to summarize the benefits for the spoke company, qdabra in this case, are they can quickly adopt this solution that I'm presenting today. They just have to have a 365 account. They download a form with our special submit logic GUI, and then they have to have a key that they use in the form so that we can basically provide some kind of level of security so that we can prevent access from users who are not registered, and then basically once they do that, they have a solution that replaces their paper-based process, and that means that they can have better data in. They don't have to re-enter it, so they save time. They can streamline their business process, and I'll show a couple other techniques at the end of the demo where they streamline the creation of a report using an InfoPath form. For the hub company, in this case Hubru, they've just installed some kind of a service in the cloud. Now you could use this solution for both two spoke companies, but in the scenario that I'm describing, the environmental consultant scenario, there's an environmental consultant in the field and there's a lab that they send samples to. Well, this hub company is that lab, and for them what they do is they just install this Azure component. They sign up for the service, obviously install the component, configure the email notifications, and then they can start receiving requests from people that have the form that they've published. So typically the company, the hub, is going to sign up by creating an Azure account, deploying the solution, configuring it to send notifications. Then they'll advertise their service in some way, and then they'll send the InfoPath form with plugin to the consultants. The consultants, the vendors in this case, will sign up. They'll visit the company website, they'll get the form, and they'll get the key to unlock the form or to use it for the submits. They'll publish it to their 365 site and they're done. So it's very easy to sign up. So let's do the demo. So I'm going to, this is from the environmental consultant side first. They're out collecting a paint sample, and here you see the environmental consultant. So their process is collect the sample, ship it to the company. They're going to fill out a form, and they're going to submit that as well. And then on the back end, that form will be submitted to a web service running in Azure that will map the data into the database. Okay, so here's what you're going to see. Actually, this is just a screenshot, so let me switch to my demo now. So here's the form on the spoke. qdabra is the company that's going to be out there collecting that sample, and we are going to collect it for the company Acme, and we'll just say John Doe is the guy, but they're going to use my email because I want to show you the notifications that arrive. And this is just 123 Main Street, and they live in Kirkland, Washington, 98033. Work phone is whatever, and the country is the USA. Now the project is, we'll just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here for the project number. There's some kind of information that specifically identifies the project. Okay, so we've got some numbers in here. We're just entering some data in. Project start date we'll say is today, and the end date is tomorrow. And we'll say initiated by the customer, and the project type is asbestos investigation. The structure is going to be a warehouse, and the report date is going to be tomorrow as well. And this is just extra information. Now I'm going to add my sample. Now for this sample, this asbestos sample, I've got actually two samples. I took a sample in the rafters, the insulation, and then I took a sample on the wall, so like a wall board. So what I'm doing here is, and this is an InfoPath form running in the browser, so it's actually allowing me to fill out this form just in the browser. I don't have to have InfoPath installed. So we'll say here insulation, and we'll say the rafters. And notice I cannot enter any data in this type of asbestos here. That's for the lab to fill out. Okay, and then we'll do the wallboard That's the wall. Okay, so we've got our two samples in there, and we could enter more information. This is a form we put together as a demo for environmental consultants, but you could have any form that submits data. And this is just showing how you would if you were an environmental consultant. So we submit the data. Now this is going to submit it to the web service, and I'm just going to switch back to my, my presentation here. We'll just verify that this succeeds. Okay, so we've succeeded, and we're going to switch back to the presentation here. And that would be this slide. So you're wondering, well, there was no login. When they submitted it to the web service, they weren't asked to authenticate. Now I was authenticated to the site, and if we switch back to the site, you can see in the upper right hand corner I have my name. I've been logged into my 365 account. This is just a form library where I publish the form. And you can see the information we're going to get back after we get the results from the company. But we didn't have to actually specify any kind of login to connect to the web service. And that's because we're doing it anonymously. And you're saying, well, what about security? If it's an anonymous submit, that's not secure. Well, actually it is. And it's secure because we're using an ID. A user ID. And this is a unique key that you store in your InfoPath form. And this key gets passed to the anonymous web service. And the anonymous web service then grants a token that's time sensitive, and it submits it back. So there's actually a double submit happening here. The first submit is to get that token, and then it uses the token to submit to the correct web service. And this enables basically protection, so that if there's some kind of a denial of service or something, then the tokens can be like 24-hour tokens, and you can reuse those over and over again in your submit process. Now, obviously, this just protects you, but it verifies that the user is a valid user, and in this situation, ignores any requests coming from a user that doesn't have a valid ID or a valid token. So this is one way that we're getting around this. Now, obviously, your security requirements may differ, but for a lot of scenarios, there is this ability to, the data is somewhat sensitive, and we're passing in this data for this lab where we collected the sample, the address. We also have information about the sample, the samples that we created. So let's switch to the lab now, and the lab is going to be a different account. So I'm going to log out from my Azure account here. And first of all, before I do this, I'm going to just show you where the data is. And here you see we have our SQL Management Studio here, SQL Server Management Studio. It's connected to that Azure database there, where we've got a database, and the database has some tables. In this case, we've created a bunch of tables here for this analysis data capture, which we're using. And you can see here that we've got that record that we just entered. So it's actually mapped from the XML data into the database here. And of course, it's got this parent table here where it's mapping out all that information. And we also have some child table information here where we're storing the actual, I think it's the samples collected. Let's just show you that real quick. As you can see here that we've got our samples here in a separate child database referring to the project number, and so you can see the two on the bottom, those are the ones I just added. So this is a database in Azure running, and we've mapped the XML data to the database. And I'll talk later in this presentation about how we did that, but I just wanted to show you the data exists in the database. Now, we're going to switch roles, like I just said, and we're going to switch to the lab technician. In order to do that, I have to log out of my account, my Office 365 account, because I need to log in as a different user, because I am a different user, and this is two different accounts. So we'll log out, and we'll open up Internet Explorer here, and we will switch to the other account, which is called hubtest.microsoft on Microsoft.com. hubtest.sharepoint.com. And of course, it's going to request that we log in using the credentials because I've got two distinct 365 accounts here, and I can't use the credentials from the first one to access the second one. What we're really showing in this demo today is how to actually share data between companies that are in 365. Okay, so I'm just going to enter I'm just going to log in here to this account, and okay, so we'll see that we have a data capture form here. Now, as a hub company, I don't necessarily have to add the data, my results data for the samples using an InfoPath form. I could connect my offsite database and synchronize certain tables to Azure and use those tables synchronization to drive the process. But for this demo, I'm using an InfoPath form because it's easy to enter the data from an InfoPath form. You can see this is the first time I've done this in a while, so it took a few seconds to render the form in the browser. Now we have our Hubbaroo form. It looks kind of the same. It's the analysis data capture. But notice that here we've got this new request that came in for Acme, and we've got their project ID, or their, it's not the project ID, what is it? It's the claim number. So it pulled in the data. So when we selected that, the drop-down queried the database. It showed us all the active projects that have not been processed. And then the form, when I selected that project and that claim, it pulled in the data from the database, copied it into the form. Notice it copied in here the samples. Okay, so this report date really probably shouldn't show up for the spoke company. It should be here. And we'll just say asbestos residues or something like that. And we're going to put in 2% for the first one and 10% for the second one. Okay, and then we're going to submit it. So I've just, as a lab, what did I just do? I just logged in as a lab technician. Of course, the samples were processed, so that there's some data that was generated as part of the analysis. We checked how much asbestos were in those two samples. And then we're entering that result data into the form that is submitting to the same database in Azure, mapping to the same tables, and it's got there's some logic in the database that's triggering a notification to the vendor. Okay, so back with the vendor now. The vendor is going to receive an email, and you can see I just got this email. This email is from an automated mailer that's running on that Azure piece. So part of the solution that we're installing on Azure has a notification piece that sends an email to the vendor, in this case qdabra, the spoke company, and it basically has some boilerplate text in it with a link to lab results. Now this is really interesting because notice this, I got this email from Azure and it has remembered the link to my actual lab, to the lab results, to the analysis, you can see here the link to the website along with the form. So I'm going to show you how that looks in a second. In order to show you that link in action, I need to log back in. I'm logging out of the hub site because I'm doing all the demo, both sides of the demo on this machine, and now I'm logging into my other 365 account and going to that library. Now I'm not going to do anything here. I'm just going to switch back to that email and click on this link. Now the link is going to point to my 365 account. It actually points to an InfoPath form on there, the form we filled out originally, and you can see that's the data we filled out. And it's now pulled in the data from the Azure Web Service that the actual lab filled out. So that that 2 and that 10% there have been pulled into the form. And I can review this, confirm it, accept it, and then part of my process as a vendor, an environmental consultant, is I need to print a report out for Acme, the company that I did the analysis on. I need to go in and print a report. So let's do that. And here you can see that we've done this quite a few times, but the form, once again, this is a different InfoPath form. This form is going to pull the data that was submitted as part of the analysis data capture. And what we've done here with the first form, the analysis data capture, is we actually mapped it to a set of SharePoint lists. And this form, the report form, is going to pull the data from that. So you can see here, I didn't even replace the logo. It's still got the logo from the hub company here. This form I got from the hub company as part of the package to someone I signed up for the process. So I'm going to select the report type I want, and this is an example in InfoPath of a data-driven design. So we have here different configurations. So the consultant, the vendor, the person who's doing the environmental consulting, can actually create a bunch of different boilerplate templates that they're using for their reports. In this case, we've got 4, and they use a different form for that, but this is just referring to those. And so you'll see here in a second, so there's the company that we just filled out, we just collected data on, got the results back. So now when we click on report, it's going to switch to the report form, and here you see a fictitious company name here is a logo on top, and we've got the information, some information about the company. The company. This would be the contact at the company, and you can see here that we've got Joanne's name in there at qdabra Software. But you can see here it did pull in the. See, this is the wrong one. No wonder I was confused. We'll go back. See if we can find it again here. Well, thought it was Acme. Okay, well, let's, obviously it's pulling in the data incorrectly here. It did pull in the first 2 items. You can see here, but it's got a bug in here, but I'll continue with the demo anyway, and it's live. So anyway, it should not have pulled in these first 2, and it should have pulled in the actual information about the customer there as well. So this form is an example of a data-driven design, and what it's doing is it's allowing us to then create this boilerplate and say, "Dear John," whatever, on, we of course change this information on October 5th, whatever, the company went out and submitted the samples to the lab, and these are the 2 samples, and these 2 samples down below here where we got the results back. And we have some recommendations for you. Now, this boilerplate text can be changed, and that's what the whole point is to speed up the process of creating a report. So we've got a few bugs in this form here today, but you can get the idea. Now, one nice thing about this is we can actually type in, we can actually sign the form, and a lot of times you want to do a professional signature. You can see here we're just hiding the result of that signature there. And this is easy to do in InfoPath. You can then query the signature from the database and replace those 2 fields with the signature to make it not look good when you print it out. And then we would move to the printout. We'd submit the report, and we would print it out using this button here. So that's pretty much what happened. Now let's go back to the database real quick, and let's take a look at what happened in the database. So in the database, notice that we had these 2 samples at the bottom, and last time we looked at the database, it was after we had submitted the samples for analysis, and if we refresh now, we should see that indeed those database samples were updated with the correct percentages. So we've just shown how 2 companies can connect data using a web service in Azure and InfoPath Forms. And I'm going to switch back and continue with the presentation here. So once again, the company side, they're actually adding the result data, and then the vendor opens up the email, clicks on the link, opens the form, submits it, and then they go and report on it. Now once again, we were using a GUID to query the database, and when we query the database to get data into the form, we're actually using a unique ID, a globally unique ID. That's what a GUID is. And that's generated for every single query. So we know we're only going to get the data that we're allowed to see. So the vendor opens a report, sees the data, confirms it, reviews the letter. So they're going to generate a report for the consultant, for the customer, and they have this nice format, and they can fill it in with their specific custom data. The nice thing about this report is that it streamlines the processing because it reduces the amount of steps they have to take. And you can see it pulls in all the data, and then they can assign it, and I just showed you that. So connecting InfoPath Forms to Azure is relatively easy. You just open up InfoPath and you add a data connection. The data connection is to a SOAP web service. That's a type of a web service. And then you have to convert the web service into a universal data connection file. So if we look back at our site in 365, we have on the left a data connection library. And this data connection library is where we store those connections to Azure. You can see here we've got my data connections, we've got the submit to the web service in Azure, and we also have the query. And these data connections were converted. We also have data connections to get the signature and query the PIN and so forth. Now to map the data to from XML to SQL, we're using our Database Accelerator web service, that's DBXL. And the web service has an admin tool that allows you to specify a mapping from XML to SQL. It's very simple to do this. And what you do is you just add your InfoPath form, that's an XSN form. The extension for those forms is XSN type. You just add that to the tool. And just like you would publish it to 365 accounts, you have to tell the web service that this is the type of form that I want you to map. And then the tool allows you to configure the mapping. So let's just take a look here. So we've published the analysis data capture form to the tool. We've got version 2.14 here. And if we look at the mapping, we've got on the left the mapping to the database. So we're using the analysis data capture table with some child tables for ADC lead, ADC or ACM, and so forth, samples collected. And you can see on the left you have the SQL table, and the columns on the right you have the InfoPath form. It's very easy to set these mappings, and then the data gets mapped into Azure. So the value of this solution is it's easy to install. The vendor, the spoke company running 365 account, all they have to do is get an InfoPath form and publish it to their 365 account. There's no login hassle because we're using IDs and tokens for security checking. We do not need to worry about some kind of a log in and log out. You saw me log in and log out because I had to show you both sides in the demo, but the users will typically be in either a spoke role or a hub role, and they'll be exchanging data with the company. If they're in a spoke role, they'll just be submitting and querying. If they're in the hub role, they would be pulling the data into their forms and be submitting it as well. But they would not play both roles, obviously. So the value proposition is that there's no real. It's easy to install. There's no real login hassle. There's obviously that streamlines their process, so they don't have to retype the data, and they can quickly generate a report. All you need is an Azure account configured with the web service. That's on the hub side, and then on the client side and the spoke side, you have an InfoPath form configured with this submit query logic. Now this solution is generic, so it could be used in any industry. I've shown you kind of a quick sample demo of it working in environmental consulting, but you could use it in other industries. And the best practices that we're really looking at here are using InfoPath client-side XML, and that means that you don't have to have logic running. We've got a loosely coupled web service in Azure, that's DBXL. That means that you don't have to create separate web services for every InfoPath form. Just one web service handles all the mapping for multiple forms. And we've got a plugin we're using in the InfoPath form that allows us to access these advanced features without having to write code. And these advanced features are data-driven in the sense that the commands that we're using in the InfoPath form are just rules. We just create a rule to access the secondary data source that has the key rules in it, and then key rules does the work of copying the data from the database into the form, or of doing the other things that it does. So here's a couple of bonus slides. InfoPath is a great client for web services because you can query a web service without code. It talks XML, which is the lingua franca of the web service, Web 2.0 land. But Microsoft doesn't give you a web service. Now SharePoint is a set of web services as well, but what you need is a web service to connect to your back-end database, and SharePoint doesn't do that. So InfoPath has built-in support for SQL. You can connect a form to a SQL database, but this is not a good practice because it creates a tight coupling. So it reduces or restricts the amount of richness that your InfoPath form can have, because you're basically limiting the form to what can be represented in SQL in your database. And the InfoPath form has a richer structure called XML that can be used to create a hierarchical structure, not just a relational structure. So you're limiting yourself there in terms of structure. You're also limiting yourself in terms of data types. The SQL database doesn't support images and rich text and things like that you can do in InfoPath. But also, you have to be VPN connected. You have to have a connection to the database. And a lot of times on the web, you don't. So the best practice is to have a web service. And Microsoft recommends that you get a web service for InfoPath Forms. So a lot of companies today who are adopting InfoPath are writing web services, and they're writing lots and lots of web services. So here's the problem. You've got to maintain all those web services. Plus, it takes you a little bit of time to create them, and you have to have a developer. So rather than do that, we recommend using one generic web service that handles the requests from all of your forms. These are different forms, right? You might have an invoice request, you might have an expense report, whatever. You're going to have lots of different InfoPath forms because your business processes will all have different data, right? But all of those forms need to have data submitted into your line of business application, which is a database or it's some other line of business application. In this case, we're using one generic web service that maps from those forms into the database, and it uses a mapping file to do that. So you can see here that we have a kind of a schematic diagram showing the InfoPath forms on the left here. They'd be accessed via the Office 365 account. You would log in, you would basically fill out your forms, and you would submit them to this Azure piece in the middle, the web service running with Azure, and then the web service, the Azure piece also has a database on it. In order to configure these, this XML to SQL mapping, we have an admin tool. It's a graphical user interface admin tool. We have a bunch of other tools that hang off the web service, allow you to configure it and do administrative tasks, but you don't need a developer. And we always store the XML alongside the data in the database. We have a separate table for that because we need to be able to reshred the data, remap the data as your form changes. So we always keep a copy of the XML because we want to maintain fidelity when we're round-tripping data. We also want to be able to store things like images and rich text in the form without having to map it out to SQL tables. So that enables a very rich solution because if things change, you can always go in and remap all your XMLs to your new database structure. And I've talked a little bit about this in another video I did last week around web services. So with InfoPath Extensions, the same idea. You've got an InfoPath form, you want to extend it, and you've got things you want to do. Maybe you want to convert an image into a link. And so you're going to have a lot of forms. And every time you extend InfoPath, rather than hire a developer to create some code, which will be different for every form, we recommend having one common library. And that's what we created with Key Roles. We created one common library. It's got about 120 different features, functions today. So you don't want to create one library for every single form. You want to have one that handles basically handles the needs of all the forms, and that reduces your maintenance cost. In addition, this is a generic library, so it can be used in any form template, regardless of the type. And that's really the best practice that we put into Key Roles, which is a piece that we're using in this solution. So that's it for the quick, well, it's about 40-minute demo here. If you have questions, feel free to email us at support@qdabra.com. Once again, that's support@qdabra.com. My name is Patrick Halls. It's been a pleasure to present to you today. Thank you for your patience going through. I think I had one demo bug, but I'll fix that. And if you got questions and you would like to see this or talk about this solution, please don't hesitate to give us a ring. Once again, that's support@qdabra.com. Have a great day.